Goliath is a serviceable alternative for a lack of action-adventure RPG games in the same way that ground-up drywall is a serviceable alternative for a lack of cocaine. Goliath starts abruptly with the crash landing of an airplane and the survival of both the pilot and co-pilot, who have rather unfortunately been separated. You, as the pilot, quickly discover that you are no longer on Earth, but on some sort of interdimensional hodgepodge of different universes, worlds, and times, a la Land of the Lost. The 70s TV series, mind you, not the movie from 2009. Your character is a human, though one with a mechanical arm, who has the ability to build robots out of a few logs, a handful of twigs, and some chewing gum in a way that would make MacGyver look like a simpleton. These robots, called Goliaths, are your means of transport, protection, and battle as you journey through the different shards that make up the place you're trapped on as you search for a way home. Along the way, you meet a variety of non-human characters, with a smattering of humans thrown in here and there, that guide you along a series of fetch quests. As a top-down action-adventure hack-and-slash game, Goliath begs to be called an action RPG, but doesn't have nearly enough RPG elements in it for it to earn that categorization. It takes more than some fetch quests and character customizations to be called an RPG, and son, this ain't an RPG. These fetch quests become increasingly frustrating as you jump from NPC to NPC, a fact that the game is well aware of, as your character makes repeated references to them as you go along. This humor alleviates some of the frustration of the game at the start, but it quickly becomes both tedious and lacking in actual humor as the self-references become strained and the dialogue tries far too hard to be funny and random. During my 14-hour playthrough of the majority of the game, this became the tip of the iceberg for a set of issues that only grew as the game went on. Self-referential humor is great, and being able to make fun of your game within your game is fine, but when the humor gets to the level of the Penguin of Doom meme, it's distracting and irritating instead of being funny, especially when nearly every line of dialogue is riddled with some sort of error, whether it's a spelling mistake or a grammatical error. I'm not a grammar Nazi by any means, but if you're a developer releasing a game that features a metric buttload of text, the least you could do is hire an editor to make sure that said text doesn't look like it was written by a 4th grader. Setting aside the issues of grammar, spelling, and failed humor, Goliath's story lacks something else that it promises repeatedly: choices that matter. In the loading screen tips, you're told repeatedly not to trust new characters you meet, that you can change the course of everything with your choices, and that your choices really matter, so be extra careful with what you do. No, that's not the case at all. Hyperbole is one thing, but this is borderline lying. The only choices that I've seen in 14 hours of gameplay have been a handful of times when I've had the choice to fight or talk to a set of characters to progress the story. In both cases, the results end up being the same, and there's no long-term effect that I've seen my choices have on the story. Alright, so enough about negatives for now, let's talk positives. Graphically, the game resembles Torchlight, which is a big plus. There's plenty of whimsy and fun, and the factions are different enough from each other to be interesting in their own ways. If this was a deeper, more developed, and more RPG-ish game, I'd love to see more about these factions and how they came to live in this world. There's a good variety of world types, from grasslands to snow and deserts to jungles, and the differing climates affect your Goliaths in different ways. Wooden ones will heal when exposed to a lot of moisture, while stone ones will become faster and more powerful as they heat up. While you can go into battle with whichever Goliath you choose, and you can carry up to 3 at a time and switch between them in real time, you're well served to give a moment's consideration to your environment and enemy types before charging into battle. With a variety of modifications available for the Goliaths, you can easily construct a set of them that will be effective against every enemy type, which will make RPG fans happy even if not much else in the game does. The control scheme and user interface take some time to get used to, and while you can play the game with either a keyboard and mouse or a controller, there isn't a clear choice when it comes to which one is best. I split my time between both control schemes, and while the controller feels better for movement and combat, once you get into the advanced combat moves and the more complex parts of the user interface, things really start to break down and you'll end up falling back on the keyboard and mouse and likely just sticking with it for the duration of your playtime, even though it doesn't feel as smooth as a controller. Sound design is one of Goliath's weak points, I'm sorry to say. The music is fine, if not forgettable, but the environment, character, and weapon sounds are just dull. In a game where I'm using a semi-magical giant robot to beat the living daylights out of giant rock monsters, enormous rats, and other robots, I'd expect sounds like weapon and fist impacts to be forceful and energetic, not quiet and underwhelming. That's the problem with the whole game, though. Goliath's setting, along with a liberal dose of suspension of disbelief, leads to a story that could be extremely interesting, but it's bogged down by a series of issues that ultimately hold it back and lead it to being nothing more than a boring slog between different NPCs as you complete the same quest with slightly different coats of paint on it each time. What led to my ultimately throwing my hands up and walking away from the game was when, after completing all of the steps I needed to get to the part of the game where I could learn how to get back to the Earth, I found that, wait, no, your reputation with these different factions you've been helping the entire game is too low. You first need to complete every single optional side quest for the factions to raise your reputation with them before proceeding with the rest of the game. After enduring hours of fetch quests, this was the last straw, and at that point the annoyance generated by the game was greater than the pleasure generated by beating the crap out of enemies with a giant robot. Bad games are one thing. They're usually easy to recognize, whether it's before you play them or after a few minutes of gameplay. Mediocre games, though, are trickier to see unless you spend a fair amount of time with them. They can do some things very well, like have a cool concept, an interesting storyline, or let you build and wear a giant robot suit to smash the crap out of giant monsters. Their bad aspects aren't immediately apparent, but they wear on the good ones, eroding them away until there's nothing left but a sour taste in your mouth and a hole in your wallet that you wish you could fill in. Goliath does several things right and holds a lot of promise, but what it does wrong outweighs the good, and that's sad. The developers have been responsive to fixing bugs in the first week of the game's release, but what really needs fixing may end up taking months or just not be possible at all. If you're a top-down hack and slash action adventure RPG junkie who needs a fix, even if that fix ends up being terrible in the end, Goliath is a serviceable alternative in the same way that ground up drywall is a serviceable alternative for cocaine. It may look okay from a distance, but once you try it, you'll wish you hadn't. I'm Mike and this is Game Night with Mike. If you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.